Zara Chen pressed her face against the cold metal wall of the transport ship, watching Earth shrink into a pale blue dot through the porthole. The shackles around her wrists felt heavier with each passing moment, a constant reminder of her new reality as cargo rather than a person. She had been freed just 72 hours ago, working as a xenobiologist at the Mars Research Station, studying alien plant samples that traders brought from distant worlds. Everything changed when the Korvaxi Empire arrived at the station with their massive dreadnoughts. They claimed humans owed them compensation for some ancient territorial dispute that nobody on Earth even remembered. The payment they demanded was not credits or resources, but people. Young, healthy humans to serve as breeding stock for their noble houses. The Korvaxi were an ancient race that resembled oversized lizards with 4 arms and scales that shifted color based on their emotions. They stood nearly 8 feet tall and possessed technology that made human weapons look like stone tools. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems, and they collected species like trophies. Humans were their newest acquisition. Zara had been selected along with 200 other humans from various colonies and stations. The selection criteria seemed random at first, but she quickly realized they had chosen people with useful skills or genetic traits. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, and artists were all represented among the captives. The Korvaxi spoke of them as if they were livestock being sorted for different purposes. The transport ship was a massive vessel with holding areas designed for multiple species. Zara shared her cramped quarters with a dozen other human women, all roughly her age. Some cried constantly, others sat in stunned silence, and a few like herself tried to gather information about their captors and destination. The ship's artificial gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth normal, making every movement require extra effort. Through conversations with other prisoners and observations of the crew, Zara learned they were bound for Korvax Prime, the Empire's capital world. There they would be distributed among various noble houses based on the needs and preferences of their new masters. Some would become servants, others would work in mines or factories, and the unlucky ones would be sent to breeding facilities to produce hybrid offspring. The thought made Zara's stomach turn. She had dedicated her life to studying alien life forms, never imagining she would become one herself in the eyes of another species. Her doctorate in xenobiology and her research experience had been her pride and joy. Now those same qualifications made her valuable property to creatures who saw humans as useful animals. During meal times in the communal area, Zara met other captives with fascinating backgrounds. There was Marcus, a former Marine who had lost his left arm in a mining accident, but still moved with military precision. Sarah worked as a hydroponics engineer and knew more about growing food in space than anyone Zara had ever met. Dr. Patel was a medical researcher who specialized in genetic diseases. Each person represented years of human knowledge and experience now stolen from Earth's colonies. The Korvaxi guards treated them with casual indifference, like farmers moving cattle. They provided adequate food and water but showed no interest in human comfort or dignity. When prisoners asked questions, the guards either ignored them or responded with incomprehensible alien sounds that their translation devices couldn't process. The message was clear. Humans were not worthy of communication, only control. As days passed aboard the transport, Zara began to notice patterns in the ship's routine. The guards changed shifts every 8 hours, and there were periods when the corridors remained mostly empty. She started mapping the ship's layout in her mind, noting which areas required special access codes and which sections seemed to house critical systems. Even if escape was impossible, gathering intelligence felt better than sitting helplessly. The other prisoners looked to her for leadership, perhaps because she remained calm while others panicked. Zara found herself organizing group discussions about their situation and possible options. Most scenarios ended badly, but talking helped people cope with their fear and uncertainty. She encouraged everyone to share their skills and knowledge, thinking it might prove useful later. One evening, while the ship traveled through hyperspace, Zara overheard 2 guards discussing their destination in broken standard. They mentioned something about marriage ceremonies and noble houses competing for the best specimens. The words chilled her blood as she realized the full scope of what awaited them. They were not just slaves or workers, but breeding stock to be paired with alien masters in some twisted version of matrimony. The revelation sparked angry discussions among the prisoners. Some talked about refusing to cooperate even if it meant punishment or death. Others argued for compliance in hopes of finding opportunities to escape later. Zara found herself caught between rage at their situation and the practical need to survive whatever came next. Her scientific training taught her to observe and adapt, but her human heart wanted to fight back against this injustice. Sleep came reluctantly in the cramped quarters, disturbed by the constant hum of the ship's engines and the quiet sobbing of her fellow captives. Zara stared at the metal ceiling and tried to imagine what awaited them on Korvax Prime. Would they be kept together or separated? Would their new owners treat them with basic decency or complete cruelty? Every scenario her mind created seemed worse than the last. As the transport ship continued its journey through the void, carrying its human cargo toward an uncertain fate, Zara made a silent promise to herself. No matter what horrors awaited on Korvax Prime, she would not let the aliens break her spirit. She would survive, she would adapt, and somehow she would find a way to fight back. The Korvaxi Empire had made a mistake in taking humans as prizes. They were about to learn that Earth's children did not go quietly into captivity. The stars outside continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the suffering of the small beings traveling between them, as the transport ship carried its precious cargo toward the unknown darkness of an alien world. The massive spires of Korvax Prime pierced the orange sky like black needles, their surfaces gleaming with alien metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Zara pressed against the transport window as their ship descended through layers of atmospheric processors and defense grids. The capital city stretched beyond the horizon, a sprawling monument to the Korvaxi Empire's power and technological advancement. The landing process took hours as their transport waited in queue behind dozens of other vessels. Cargo ships from distant worlds brought tribute and resources to the Empire's heart, while sleek warships departed on missions to expand Korvaxi influence across the galaxy. Zara counted at least 30 different alien ship designs, representing species she had never seen before. The diversity was both fascinating and terrifying, proof of how many civilizations had fallen under Korvaxi control. When their ship finally touched down in the detention center's landing bay, armed guards in powered armor boarded immediately. The Korvaxi soldiers moved with mechanical precision, herding the human prisoners into formation with energy prods that delivered painful shocks to anyone who moved too slowly. Zara helped an elderly scientist named Professor Williams who had trouble walking after weeks in the cramped transport quarters. The detention facility was a massive complex of metal and crystal that rose several stories underground. Translucent barriers separated different sections, each holding various alien species in conditions that ranged from comfortable to horrific. Zara saw creatures she couldn't identify being kept in environmental suits, while others roamed freely in chambers filled with strange gases. The humans were processed through a series of medical scans and genetic tests that felt more like livestock evaluation than immigration procedures. Dr. Patel was pulled aside early in the process, his medical expertise apparently making him valuable for immediate assignment. Sarah, the hydroponics engineer, disappeared into a different line, along with other technical specialists. Marcus tried to resist when guards attempted to separate him from the group, but the energy weapons they carried made resistance futile. Zara watched her fellow prisoners being sorted like packages, each destined for different fates in the alien empire. The remaining humans were divided into smaller groups, based on criteria that seemed arbitrary but probably reflected Korvaxi social hierarchies and preferences. Zara found herself with about 30 others in a holding area that featured basic amenities and transparent walls that offered views of the city beyond. The message was clear. They were valuable enough to keep in good condition but had no privacy or freedom. Hours passed before Korvaxi officials arrived to address their group. The lead administrator was taller than the guards, with scales that shifted from deep purple to silver as he spoke. His forearms gestured in complex patterns while translation devices converted his words into standard. The content of his speech made Zara's blood run cold. They were to be prepared for marriage ceremonies with members of noble houses throughout the empire. The Korvaxi believed that hybrid offspring would strengthen their genetic diversity, while adding human adaptability and creativity to their bloodlines. Each human would be paired with a suitable mate, based on genetic compatibility and social standing. Resistance would result in memory modification and behavioral conditioning that would leave them compliant, but mentally damaged. The administrator explained that they should feel honored by their selection, Humans were considered exotic and interesting, with unusual problem-solving abilities that impressed their captors. Their new spouses would provide comfortable lives in exchange for cooperation and offspring. The alternative was assignment to industrial facilities or research laboratories, where life expectancy was measured in months rather than years. After the briefing, Korvaxi attendants escorted the humans to individual preparation chambers. Zara's room featured a bed, washing facilities, and a wardrobe filled with clothing that approximated human styles, but was clearly designed by aliens. The garments fit poorly and felt strange against her skin, made from materials that seemed to change texture based on temperature. Everything served to remind her that she was no longer in a human world. The next few days blurred together in a routine of medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and cultural orientation sessions. Korvaxi scientists studied human behavior with clinical detachment, recording reactions to various stimuli and social situations. They seemed particularly interested in emotional responses and creative problem-solving abilities. Zara answered their questions carefully, trying to appear cooperative while revealing as little as possible about human weaknesses or capabilities. During one session, a female Korvaxi researcher with yellow-green scales questioned Zara about human reproduction and family structures. The alien seemed genuinely curious about concepts like romantic love and emotional bonding, which apparently did not exist in Korvaxi culture. Their society was built on genetic optimization and social utility, rather than personal connections. The researcher took detailed notes about human pair bonding behaviors and their potential effects on hybrid offspring. Between examinations, Zara was allowed to interact with other humans in her group. They shared information about their individual assessments and tried to piece together what was happening to them. Some had been matched with specific Korvaxi nobles based on genetic testing, while others remained unassigned. The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing their fates, as imagination often created scenarios more terrible than reality. Marcus had been assigned to a military house that valued his combat experience, despite his missing arm. The Korvaxi apparently had regenerative technology that could restore lost limbs, making him useful as both a breeding partner and military advisor. Sarah would join an agricultural house that needed her hydroponics expertise to improve food production on their worlds. Each assignment reflected human skills that the aliens found valuable. Zara remained unmatched after several days, which began to worry her. The other humans speculated that she might be too valuable to assign quickly, or perhaps too dangerous. Her xenobiology background gave her knowledge about alien species that could be useful in many contexts. The administrators seemed to be waiting for something specific, though they provided no explanation for the delay. The waiting gave her time to observe the facility's routines and security measures. Guards changed shifts regularly, but their patterns were predictable. The energy barriers that contained them could be temporarily disabled for maintenance, though the process required specific authorization codes. Zara memorized everything she could, still hoping for some opportunity to escape or at least communicate with the outside universe. On the 7th day of her imprisonment, the administrators finally announced her assignment. She would be transported to a remote research station where her new husband awaited. The Korvaxi official who delivered the news seemed unusually pleased about the match, describing it as particularly suitable for both parties involved. When Zara asked for details about her intended spouse, the alien simply stated that all would be revealed upon arrival at her new home. The journey to the research station took 3 days aboard a smaller transport vessel that felt more like a luxury yacht than a prison ship. Zara was the only human passenger, accompanied by a Korvaxi escort who treated her with unexpected courtesy. The alien introduced herself as administrator, Thekla, and explained that she served as liaison between human captives and their new families throughout the Empire. Thekla's scales displayed warm golden hues that the translation device indicated represented genuine friendliness. Unlike the cold efficiency of the detention center staff, she seemed interested in Zara's comfort and emotional well-being. When Zara asked about this unusual treatment, Thekla explained that her new assignment was considered special within Korvaxi society. The research station operated under different protocols than typical Imperial facilities. During their conversations, Zara learned more about the facility that would become her new home. The station orbited a gas giant in a remote system, conducting research into exotic matter and dimensional physics. Its isolation made it valuable for dangerous experiments that could potentially destroy entire planets if they went wrong. The small staff consisted of researchers from various species within the Empire, making it one of the most diverse installations in Korvaxi space. The administrator was unusually willing to discuss the station's work and personnel. Most research involved studying artifacts left behind by an ancient civilization that had vanished millions of years ago. These predecessors had possessed technology that even the advanced Korvaxi Empire couldn't fully understand or replicate. Recent discoveries suggested they had achieved some form of dimensional manipulation that could revolutionize space travel and energy production. Thekla seemed particularly excited when discussing Zara's intended spouse, though she remained frustratingly vague about specific details. The match had been arranged by the station's director himself, who apparently had very specific requirements for his research staff. Zara's xenobiology background and her particular genetic markers made her an ideal candidate for both scientific collaboration and reproductive purposes. The administrator hinted that her new husband shared similar qualifications and background. As their ship approached the research station, Zara got her first view of what would become her new home. The facility was enormous, with multiple habitat rings spinning around a central core that housed the main laboratories. Docking ports jutted out from the hub like mechanical flowers, accommodating vessels of various sizes and configurations. The whole structure gleamed against the backdrop of the gas giant's swirling clouds, a testament to Korvaxi engineering and their commitment to scientific advancement. The docking process was smooth and efficient, handled by automated systems that guided their transport into a berth designed for diplomatic vessels. Through the porthole, Zara could see other ships that suggested the station hosted visitors from many different species. She recognized Korvaxi designs alongside others that were completely alien to her, including one vessel that seemed to be grown rather than built from conventional materials. Thekla escorted Zara through the station's corridors after they disembarked. The artificial gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth normal, and the atmosphere had a metallic tang that suggested heavy recycling systems. The architecture blended functional Korvaxi engineering with decorative elements from other cultures, creating spaces that felt both alien and surprisingly welcoming. Research stations apparently operated with more cultural flexibility than military installations. They passed laboratories, where various alien species worked together on projects that Zara couldn't begin to understand. She saw creatures that looked like living crystals manipulating energy fields, while six-limbed beings that resembled giant spiders analyzed samples under microscopes designed for non-human anatomy. The diversity was staggering, and she began to realize that the Korvaxi Empire was more complex than simple military conquest, suggested the administrative section featured offices and meeting rooms, arranged around a central atrium that rose several levels through the station's core. Natural light from the distant star was supplemented by bioluminescent panels that created a warm, comfortable environment. Plants from various worlds grew in carefully maintained gardens, their exotic fragrances mixing to create an atmosphere that felt almost homey despite the alien setting. Thekla led her to a suite of rooms that had been prepared for her arrival. The quarters were spacious by space station standards, featuring a bedroom, study area, and private laboratory equipped with xenobiology research equipment. Someone had clearly taken care to provide facilities that would allow her to continue her scientific work. The gesture surprised her, as she had expected to be treated as breeding stock rather than a valued colleague. The administrator explained that she would have several days to settle in before the marriage ceremony. During that time, she could explore the station, meet her future colleagues, and prepare for her new life. The ceremony itself would be a simple civil procedure required by Korvaxi law, after which she would have considerable freedom to pursue her research interests. Her new husband was apparently eager to collaborate on projects that combined their respective expertise. When Zara asked again for details about her intended spouse, Thekla simply smiled and said that direct introduction would be more appropriate than second-hand descriptions. She hinted that the arrangement would be far more beneficial than Zara currently imagined, and that her new life would offer opportunities for discovery and advancement that few humans had ever experienced. The mysterious nature of these statements only increased Zara's anxiety about what awaited her. After Thekla departed, Zara explored her new quarters and found personal items that had apparently been transported from her old laboratory on Mars. Someone had taken care to preserve her research notes, specimen samples, and even personal photographs from her former life. The gesture suggested either remarkable thoughtfulness or careful psychological manipulation, designed to make her more compliant. The laboratory equipment was more advanced than anything she had used before, incorporating technology that could analyze alien biochemistry with precision that human science couldn't match. Whoever had designed the space clearly understood her research interests and had provided tools that would allow her to advance her work by decades rather than years. The setup was both exciting and troubling, as it suggested her captors knew far more about her than she had realized. That evening, Zara stood at her window watching the gas giant storms rage across its surface. The swirling clouds created patterns that seemed almost alive, lit by lightning that struck continuously through the dense atmosphere. The view was beautiful and alien, a constant reminder that she was farther from home than any human had ever traveled. Tomorrow she would meet her new husband and begin a life she had never chosen, in a place she had never imagined. The morning of the ceremony arrived with artificial dawn lighting that gradually brightened the station's corridors to simulate planetary cycles. Zara had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities about what her new husband might be like. Would he be a typical Korvaxi noble, cold and calculating? Perhaps one of the other alien species she had observed working in the laboratories. The uncertainty gnawed at her as she prepared. For what felt like the most important day of her life, Thekla arrived early with a team of attendants carrying ceremonial garments that had been specifically designed for the occasion. The outfit was surprisingly elegant, combining human aesthetic preferences with Korvaxi formal wear traditions. The fabric felt luxurious against her skin and seemed to adjust automatically to her body temperature and movements. Even as a prisoner, she was being treated with a level of respect that she hadn't expected. The administrator seemed unusually nervous as they made their way through the station toward the ceremony location. Her scales flickered between colors that the translation device interpreted as excitement and anxiety. When Zara commented on this, Thekla explained that interspecies marriages were rare events that drew attention from throughout the Empire. This particular union had generated significant interest among the scientific community due to the unique qualifications of both participants. They walked through sections of the station that Zara hadn't seen before, passing laboratories where researchers from dozens of species worked on projects that defied human understanding. She saw beings that looked like living smoke manipulating dark matter, while crystalline entities that communicated through harmonic resonances analyzed dimensional fractures in space-time itself. The scale and sophistication of the research made her feel small and insignificant. The ceremony was to take place in the station's central observatory, a massive chamber with transparent walls that offered panoramic views of the surrounding space. The gas giant dominated one side of the room while stars stretched into infinity on the other sides. The setting was breathtaking, designed to remind participants of their place in the cosmic order and the vastness of the empire they were joining. As they approached the observatory, Zara could hear voices and movement from within. The guest list apparently included researchers and administrators from throughout the station, making this a significant social event rather than a simple legal procedure. Her stomach churned with nervousness as she realized that dozens of alien eyes would be watching her enter into a marriage with someone she had never met. Thekla paused outside the entrance and turned to Zara with an expression that seemed almost apologetic. She explained that there had been some unusual circumstances surrounding this particular marriage arrangement, but that everything would become clear once the ceremony began. The administrator's vague warnings only increased Zara's anxiety as they prepared to enter the chamber where her fate awaited. The observatory was filled with beings from at least 20 different species. All turned expectantly toward the entrance. Zara recognized some of the alien types from her xenobiology studies, while others were completely unknown to her. The diversity was overwhelming, and she felt like a specimen being examined by an audience of scientists. Conversation stopped as she entered, and she could feel the weight of their collective attention. At the far end of the chamber, beneath the massive observation windows, stood a figure that made Zara's breath catch in her throat. He was tall and lean, dressed in formal attire that followed Korvaxi protocols but was clearly designed for human proportions. His hair was dark brown with silver streaks at the temples, and his face showed the weathered confidence of someone who had spent years in space. Most importantly, he was unmistakably human. The shock of recognition hit Zara like a physical blow. Her intended husband was not an alien at all, but a member of her own species. She had prepared herself for marriage to a Korvaxi noble, or perhaps some other alien creature, but this possibility had never occurred to her. Questions flooded her mind as she tried to understand how another human had ended up in such a position within the Empire. As she approached the ceremonial area, the man turned to face her with a smile that seemed both welcoming and sympathetic. His eyes were intelligent and kind, with laugh lines that suggested someone who had found reasons for humor even in difficult circumstances. When he spoke, his voice carried traces of an accent that sounded faintly European, though years in space had softened its distinctive features. He introduced himself as Dr. James Morrison, formerly of the Earth Colonial Research Division, and currently the chief xenoarchaeologist for the research station. His story, briefly told during the pre-ceremony preparations, was both fascinating and troubling. He had been captured by Korvaxi forces nearly 5 years earlier, during a raid on a human research outpost in disputed territory. Unlike most human prisoners, his expertise in ancient alien technologies had made him too valuable to waste in slave labor. Instead of being sold to a noble house or sent to breeding facilities, James had been assigned directly to this research station to help decode artifacts from the vanished civilization they were studying. His work had proven so successful that the station director had granted him unusual privileges within the facility, including the right to request a human companion for both personal and professional reasons. When Zara's profile had appeared in the Imperial databases, he had specifically requested her assignment. The ceremony itself was surprisingly brief and dignified. A Korvaxi official performed the legal requirements while translation devices converted the vows into multiple languages for the diverse audience. James and Zara exchanged rings that had been crafted from metal, taken from the ancient artifacts they would be studying together. The symbolism was both beautiful and unsettling, linking their personal union to the mysterious legacy of a dead civilization. As the official pronouncements concluded and the guests began to congratulate the new couple, Zara found herself overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Relief that her husband was human warred with anger that this arrangement had been made without her consent. Gratitude for avoiding a worse fate mixed with resentment at being treated like property, to be exchanged between owners. James seemed to understand her confusion and gently guided her away from the crowd to a private alcove where they could talk. He explained that he had spent years watching other humans arrive at the station as prisoners, most of them assigned to menial labor or worse. When the opportunity arose to request a companion, he had chosen someone whose scientific background would allow them to work as partners rather than as captor and victim. His hope was that together, they might find ways to help other humans within the Empire while pursuing research that could benefit all sentient species. The conversation revealed that James had not abandoned hope of eventual return to human space, but had chosen survival and adaptation as his immediate strategy. He had earned respect and trust within the research community by making himself indispensable, while secretly gathering intelligence about Korvaxi technology and weaknesses. His position gave him access to communication systems and transportation resources that could prove valuable if the right opportunity arose. As they talked, Zara began to realize that her situation, while far from ideal, was better than anything she could have hoped for under the circumstances. She had found not just a human companion, but a potential ally in resistance against their captors. The marriage that had terrified her now seemed like the beginning of something that might eventually lead to freedom, not just for herself, but for all the humans trapped within the Korvaxi Empire. The first few weeks of married life aboard the research station fell into a routine that was both strange and surprisingly comfortable. Zara and James had decided to take their relationship slowly, focusing first on building trust and friendship, rather than rushing into intimacy that neither of them had chosen freely. Their shared quarters featured separate sleeping areas and a common workspace where they could collaborate on research projects. James proved to be an excellent guide to life within the Korvaxi Empire. He taught Zara how to navigate the complex social hierarchies that governed interactions between different species, and which alien customs needed to be respected to avoid giving offense. Most importantly, he showed her how to be valuable, enough to their captors that they would overlook small acts of rebellion or independence that would be punished in less privileged prisoners. Their research collaboration began with James introducing Zara to the ancient artifacts that had made him indispensable to the station's mission. The objects were unlike anything in her xenobiology experience, seeming to exist partially outside normal space-time. Some appeared solid but could be passed through like holograms, while others shifted between different materials based on the observer's expectations. The technology was so advanced that even the Korvaxi could only study it without truly understanding its principles. Zara's background in alien biochemistry provided new perspectives on artifacts that James had been studying for years. She noticed patterns in the objects that suggested they had been grown or evolved rather than manufactured, indicating that their creators had mastered biological engineering to a degree that made Korvaxi genetic manipulation look primitive. Her insights led to breakthroughs in understanding how the artifacts stored and processed information. Working together, they discovered that many of the artifacts contained data storage systems that operated on quantum principles rather than conventional electronics. The information was encoded in ways that required multiple species to decode fully, as if the creators had anticipated that their legacy would only be understood by collaborative effort between different types of minds. This revelation excited their Korvaxi supervisors, who began providing additional resources and autonomy for their research. The increased freedom allowed James and Zara to explore more of the station and interact with researchers from other species. They learned that the Korvaxi Empire was not the monolithic military organization that human intelligence reports had suggested. Many member species had joined voluntarily to gain access to advanced technology and protection from more aggressive civilizations. The Empire offered stability and scientific advancement in exchange for loyalty and resources. However, they also discovered that humans held a unique position within this structure. Their adaptability and problem-solving abilities made them valuable, but their independent nature and emotional attachments made them difficult to control through conventional means. Most other species in the Empire were either naturally hierarchical or had been conditioned over generations to accept Korvaxi authority. Humans remained stubbornly individualistic even after years of captivity. During their research, Zara and James began to uncover evidence that the vanished civilization had faced a similar challenge to the one now confronting the galaxy. Ancient records suggested that a powerful empire had been expanding aggressively, consuming younger species and strip mining entire star systems. The artifacts contained what appeared to be weapon designs and defensive technologies that had been developed in response to this threat. The implications were staggering. If they could understand and replicate the ancient technology, it might provide ways to resist Korvaxi expansion or even liberate the species currently under their control. However, the complexity of the systems required insights from multiple disciplines and species. No single group possessed all the knowledge necessary to unlock the secrets contained within the artifacts. James revealed that he had been carefully building relationships with researchers from other species who might be sympathetic to resistance efforts. Many of the beings working at the station were there voluntarily, but some had been conscripted just as the humans had been. A growing network of scientists from various backgrounds was secretly sharing information and discussing possibilities for eventual rebellion against their overseers. The alien researcher who proved most helpful was a being called HFY, a crystalline entity from a species that communicated through harmonic frequencies. HFY's people had been among the first to be conquered by the Korvaxi Empire, and their entire civilization had been reduced to slavery within a few generations. Despite this history, or perhaps because of it, HFY had become one of the station's most valuable researchers, while secretly documenting Korvaxi weaknesses and technological vulnerabilities. Through carefully coded conversations during research sessions, they learned that HFY had been working with other enslaved researchers to develop technologies that could disrupt Korvaxi control systems. The crystalline being had discovered that the Empire's communication networks relied on quantum entanglement principles that could be interfered with using properly tuned harmonic frequencies. A coordinated effort across multiple star systems could potentially cause a communications breakdown that would leave Korvaxi forces isolated, and vulnerable. Zara's xenobiology expertise proved crucial in understanding how different species could work together to implement such a plan. Each race had unique abilities and perspectives that would be necessary for success. Humans provided adaptability and creative problem-solving. The crystalline beings offered harmonic manipulation. Other species contributed different technological specialties. The ancient artifacts seem to have been designed specifically to enable such cooperation between diverse civilizations. As their understanding of the situation deepened, Zara and James realized that their marriage had been more than just a convenient arrangement. The Korvaxi administrators had unknowingly created a partnership that could potentially threaten their entire empire. By bringing together human creativity with access to ancient weapons technology and connections to other resistant cells throughout their territory, they had planted the seeds of their own downfall. The challenge now was to continue their research while secretly preparing for eventual rebellion, all while maintaining the appearance of loyal imperial subjects. They had to be patient and careful, building their network of allies while gathering the knowledge and resources they would need when the time came to act. The work was dangerous and the timeline uncertain, but for the first time since her capture, Zara felt genuine hope for the future. Every day brought new discoveries about the ancient technology and new connections with potential allies throughout the station. The resistance was growing, slowly but steadily, hidden within the Empire's own research facilities. The Korvaxi had created the perfect conditions for their own defeat by bringing together the brightest minds from dozens of species and giving them access to weapons technology beyond their understanding. James and Zara were no longer just prisoners adapting to captivity, but active participants in a growing rebellion that could reshape the galaxy. The breakthrough came during a routine analysis of what had seemed like decorative elements on one of the larger artifacts. Zara noticed that the patterns weren't purely aesthetic, but contained biological information encoded in ways that resembled DNA structures. When she shared this observation with James and Kethva, they realized that the ancient civilization had hidden their most important technologies within seemingly harmless ornamental designs. Working together with increased urgency, the team began to decode the biological information and discovered construction blueprints for devices that could generate massive electromagnetic pulses. The weapons were designed to disable electronic systems across entire star systems without causing permanent damage to living beings. More importantly, the plans included detailed instructions for building the devices using materials and technologies that were readily available on their research station. The discovery coincided with troubling news from other parts of the Empire. Kethva had intercepted communications indicating that the Korvaxi were planning a major expansion into previously unexplored sectors of the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds with primitive civilizations would be conquered or destroyed to make room for imperial colonies. The timeline for this expansion was aggressive, with initial strikes planned within months rather than years. James called an emergency meeting of their resistance cell, which had grown to include representatives from 8 different species working at the station. They gathered in a maintenance area that Kethva had determined was free from surveillance equipment, using the crystalline being's harmonic abilities to create a sound dampening field around their conversation. The diversity of the group would have been remarkable under normal circumstances, but the urgency of their situation left no time for celebration of their cooperation. The group faced a critical decision about whether to accelerate their timeline for resistance activities. Building the electromagnetic pulse devices would require several weeks of careful work, during which they would be vulnerable to discovery by station security. However, waiting longer might mean missing the opportunity to prevent the upcoming expansion and the suffering it would cause to billions of innocent beings throughout the galaxy. Zara argued for immediate action, pointing out that their research had already provided them with enough information to begin construction of multiple pulse devices. Her xenobiology expertise had revealed that the ancient weapons could be modified to target specific frequencies used by Korvaxi technology, while leaving other species' equipment unaffected. This meant they could disable Imperial forces without crippling the technological infrastructure that enslaved species depended on for survival. The construction process proved to be the most dangerous phase of their rebellion. They had to work in small groups using equipment and materials that were available in the research laboratories. while maintaining the appearance of normal scientific activities. James used his privileged access to restricted areas to gather rare elements needed for the devices, while Zara developed biological components that would allow the weapons to distinguish between different types of technology. HFY proved invaluable during this phase, using harmonic abilities to mask the energy signatures of their work from the station's monitoring systems. The crystalline being could generate interference patterns that made their activities appear to be routine research into the ancient artifacts. This cover story allowed them to work openly in the laboratories while actually building weapons that could bring down the empire that enslaved them. The other members of their cell worked to establish communication links with resistance groups throughout Imperial space. They used the station's research communication array to send coded messages disguised as scientific data transmissions. The network that emerged was vast and sophisticated, spanning dozens of star systems and including representatives from most of the species under Korvaxi control. After 3 weeks of intensive work, they had successfully constructed 12 electromagnetic pulse devices and established contact with resistance cells on 37 different worlds. The plan that emerged from their coordination was ambitious and dangerous, requiring simultaneous strikes against Imperial communication hubs and military installations across the entire empire. Success would depend on precise timing and the cooperation of beings who had never met face-to-face. The final phase began when James received notice that their research station would be visited by a high-ranking Korvaxi admiral who was touring facilities involved in the expansion planning. The admiral's ship would carry communication equipment and military personnel that could serve as targets for their first test of the electromagnetic pulse weapons. More importantly, success against such a prominent target would signal resistance cells throughout the empire that the rebellion had begun. On the day of the admiral's visit, Zara and James worked together to modify one of their pulse devices for use against the visiting ship. They had to be careful to make the attack look like an accident or equipment malfunction, rather than sabotage, to avoid immediate retaliation against the station's population. The device was programmed to activate when the admiral's ship was departing, creating the appearance of a random system failure. The plan worked perfectly. As the admiral's vessel prepared to enter hyperspace, the electromagnetic pulse disabled all of its electronic systems without causing any physical damage to the ship or its crew. The vessel was left stranded in normal space, unable to communicate with Imperial Command or continue its mission. Station personnel responded with apparently genuine concern, offering assistance while secretly celebrating their success. The disabled ship provided an unexpected opportunity when the Admiral requested technical assistance from the station's research teams. James and Zara volunteered to help diagnose the system failures, giving them access to advanced Korvaxi military technology that they could study and potentially sabotage further. They discovered that Imperial ships use centralized control systems that could be disrupted by relatively simple modifications to their communication arrays. Word of the Admiral's ship malfunction spread quickly through Imperial communication networks, providing the signal that resistance cells throughout the galaxy had been waiting for. Within hours, similar equipment failures began occurring on Korvaxi ships and installations across dozens of star systems. The electromagnetic pulse weapons proved effective beyond their creators' expectations, causing cascading failures in Imperial infrastructure. The Korvaxi response was swift but confused, as their communication systems were among the first casualties of the resistance attacks. Orders could not be transmitted effectively between different parts of the Empire, leaving local commanders to respond independently to what appeared to be random equipment failures. This lack of coordination prevented them from recognizing the scope of the rebellion until it was too late to mount an effective counterattack. As reports of successful strikes reached their research station, Zara felt a mixture of elation and terror. They had actually done it. A small group of enslaved researchers had managed to strike a significant blow against one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. However, they also knew that retaliation would be swift and brutal once the Korvaxi realized what had happened. James took her hand as they watched news reports of Imperial ships losing power throughout the galaxy. For the first time in years, they could see a future where humanity might be free again. The smile that spread across Zara's face was genuine and joyful, reflecting not just personal happiness but hope for billions of beings throughout the stars. The forced marriage that had begun as a symbol of their captivity had become the foundation for a rebellion that could reshape the galaxy.